Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be looking at Game 6 from the 2014 World Chess Championships between Magnus Carlsen, the reigning champion, and Vishy Anand, the challenger. Up until this point, we are tied. Both players have one win apiece, and the rest of the games are drawn. Game 6, we're going to see Magnus Carlsen playing the white pieces, Vishy Anand defending with the black pieces. When we go into Game 7, Magnus Carlsen will actually have the white pieces again, and then we will flip-flop going through Game 12, where Vishy Anand will close it out with the white pieces. So very important right now that Magnus Carlsen has some good games in here, both 6, which we're going to be looking at, and Game 7, which is going to be coming up here in a couple days, because he knows that this is his chance to really go out in front with the white pieces, maybe potentially get some big wins in here, and really put Vishy Anand in a tough spot. So we'll go ahead and get started. Pawn to e4, similar to what we've kind of seen this whole tournament. Magnus Carlsen playing those aggressive openings with pawn to e4. Vishy Anand opting to kind of go for that pawn to d4. Vishy decides to go ahead and play with the aggressive defense that he has chosen so far, and that is the Sicilian defense, which is always good to see that he's coming to attack. Knight to f3, pawn to e6, pretty common moves for the Sicilian defense. We now see the con variation, so pawn here to a6, kind of controlling the square here on b5, so you know the bishop can't come here. Also the knight can't come over here to b5 either. Pawn to c4, so just starting to put pressure on this central light square right here. Knight to f6, knight here to c3. Bishop to b4, developing the minor piece, getting ready to castle on the king side if he wants to. Queen here to d3. So, you know, Magnus Carlsen, he could try to get pretty creative and castle on the queen side, but more than likely in this setup, he's going to castle on the king side. Knight here to c6, development move. We do see an exchange off the board, which we don't always see. And now after the pawn takes here on c6, it's an interesting situation that doesn't always come up, but we do see these players decide to go ahead and exchange their queens off the board very early on. So Vishy Anand can no longer castle, so he's going to be looking to even get his king involved into the game. Typically when your opponent's queen comes off the board, it's a little safer for your king to go ahead and get towards the middle of the board, maybe join into the attack. Now both sides do have a lot of material on board, so they may want to exchange some material off before they get too aggressive with their king, but Magnus Carlsen right now is the only player left that can castle his king. We now see the pawn pushing forward to e5. It was being attacked right now. Now the knight's going to come back here to d7, bishop here to f4, adding another defender, also opening up the door if Magnus Carlsen wants to castle on the queen side. Vishy Anand decides he wants to go ahead and give Magnus Carlsen double pawns here on the c file, and then the king to c7. So the sides, you know, as you looked at both sides of the board, Vishy Anand decides that the queen side is where he wants to go ahead and try to kind of push for an advantage. The king side, he doesn't really have any of his material over here, and so because he wants to attack on the queen side, he's going to go ahead and start getting his king involved as much as possible. Magnus Carlsen decides to go ahead and push on the king side, so pawn to h4, and if we kind of look at both sides, what they're looking to do here, we do see Magnus Carlsen with the double bishop pair, which is always good. It's somewhat of a semi-closed game, so Magnus Carlsen definitely wants to get a lot of the pawns off the board, so his bishops pretty much have free reign to control the entire board. He also has double pawns here on the c file, which is not really great. If he maybe had a pawn on the d file, this would not be nearly as bad. So definitely something that Vishy Anand can maybe attack later on in the game. Magnus Carlsen still is the only one that can castle, but really it's not going to do too much for him to castle on the king side. Potentially if he wants to go ahead and maybe double up with his rooks over here on the queen side, maybe try to control this semi-open file on the b file, this open file here on the d file. He has those options. On the other side, Vishy Anand, he wants to try to keep it somewhat semi-closed. His knight's going to be a lot better if there's a lot of pawns on board. He can kind of jump all over the place. More than likely, he's going to want to get this light tower bishop off the board. Right now, it's not doing too much. It's kind of actually blocked off, especially by this pawn here on e6. So unless he can get it involved over on the queen side, he would really like to exchange that off the board. Both of these players are going to try to look to get their rooks involved. They usually want these to be pretty aggressive in these type of openings. They don't want them to just kind of stand back and just defend pawns. They really want them to be in the center of the board and pushing for an advantage. We now see pawn here to b6, pawn here to h5. And the next move is pretty interesting. When I saw it, it didn't seem that crazy to me, but pretty much all the commentators, even a lot of the grandmasters that were kind of giving commentary on the side, thought that pawn to h6 really put Vishy Anand in a tough spot, because this pawn here on g7 was going to come under fire, and it would be very, very difficult for Vishy Anand to have to deal with this and worry about anything else on the board if he wanted to push for an advantage on the queen side or do much else, because again, he was going to have to worry about the square here on g7. So as soon as we did see this h6, it was pretty interesting. Magnus Carlsen actually started attacking it right away. So it was something that Magnus Carlsen saw, and so we see the castle on the queen side. Again, it doesn't really matter where the kings are. We don't have to worry that there's not a lot of safety. There's a lot of air in front of this king right here on c1. But this is really just a way to get this rook involved very, very quickly. So rook here to d3, getting ready to swing over here to the g3 square and start to attack this pawn here on g7. Pawn here to c5, opening up the door for this light square bishop to control this long diagonal right here. Rook over here to g3 as we talked about, and now this rook comes over here to g8. It's very important to make sure that you defend with your rooks properly. We don't want to see Vishy Anand play rook here to g7. This light square bishop could eventually come here to d3, and then bishop here to h7. That's going to be very, very difficult for Vishy Anand to deal with. So he correctly defends with his rook here on g8, coming from a8. We now see the last minor piece from Magnus Carlsen come into the game with bishop here to d3. The knight's going to come back here to f8, trying to mitigate some of the risk over here on the king side. Bishop back here to e3, and then Vishy Anand plays pawn here to g6. Starting to realize from Vishy Anand that, hey, just didn't want to have to deal with the square here on g7. His opponent would just put a lot of pressure on it. So now that his knight back here on f8 and his rook both can kind of defend this square right here with the pawn here on f7, then now's a good time to go ahead and push forward. So after the exchange, the knight's going to come here to g6 recapture, and then we see the rook come up here to h5, defending this square here on e5, but also just trying to stay pretty active for Magnus Carlsen. So far up into this game, Magnus Carlsen has definitely been the aggressor. Vishy Anand's been a little bit more defensively minded set so far, and so Magnus Carlsen wants to keep that going so far. Vishy Anand right now trying to hold on, making sure he doesn't do anything too crazy, and then hopefully Magnus Carlsen can make a mistake and he can come in and possibly take a point away. So now we see bishop here to c6, bishop coming back here to c2, king here to b7, small incremental moves in the game that both sides decided was going to be good for them. Rook up here to g4, defending the square here on c4, so just a little bit better. Pawn here to a5, so Vishy Anand realizing that it's going to be tough on the king side to really push for an advantage, so maybe in the future decides he wants to push on the queen side, so pawn here to h5, bishop here to d1, rook over here to d8, attacking, controlling this long open file right here. Now Magnus Carlsen had a few options from here. He decided just to bring his bishop back here to c2. He really didn't have to, though. He doesn't even have to move his bishop at all if he doesn't want to, but he could have easily played bishop here to e2. I probably like this a little bit better. It controls the square here on c4, and you know, really this rook just isn't doing too much. Even if the rook wanted to be pretty aggressive and come down here to d3, it's still controlling that square right now. But he decides to go ahead and play bishop here to c2, and then the rook's going to swing back over here to g8. The next move was pretty critical in this match, and Magnus Carlsen makes a huge blunder. He plays king here to d2, and afterwards he said king to d2 is really the only move that he can make, which puts him in a very bad spot, which is interesting that of all the moves, he found the one that was possibly the worst. And this is bad for a number of reasons, but it was interesting for those who actually got to watch the match. As soon as Magnus Carlsen played this, he just put his head down and kind of shook his head of disgust. He realized as soon as he had done it that he had made a huge mistake. They even asked him in an interview afterwards, did you just not even try to put on a poker face? And he said he was just so disgusted with the move that he had a horrible poker face. He couldn't just hide his emotion at all. So from here, it's pretty easy. Vishy Anand can just come in here to e5, and this is dangerous because, you know, it's attacking both this rook here on g4 and also this pawn here. And the pawn's very dangerous as well, because if it's taken, then the king here on d2 is check. But now we do see an exchange on the board, and then this knight can come in here to c4. All of a sudden the king's up comes up here to D3. The knight's now going to come to B2, attacking as well. The king can come back here. The rook can take here on G8. The rook can swing up here to H6 if he wants to, and then bishop here to B5. And all of a sudden, Vishy Anand is in a really, really good spot on this board. Unfortunately for Vishy Anand, the very easy move that we all kind of thought, everyone just thought that he would immediately do it. He actually immediately played something else. He took about 30 seconds, which is pretty fast at this high level of play. He played pawn to A4. And this was another huge blunder, maybe even bigger than Magnus Carlsen. And this definitely was a turning point yet again in this game. Afterwards, Vishy Anand just said he didn't realize what a gift his opponent had given him, and sometimes when when you're not looking for a gift, you don't take that gift. So pawn to A4 allows Magnus Carlsen to play king here to E2. And it's very important to look at this. You know, if we come back here and say, okay, the king doesn't come here to D2. Let's say the king just comes here to D1. Because they asked Magnus Carlsen later, you know, you said king to D2 is a massive blunder, and everyone would agree with that, but where would you go instead? He said, you know, king to D2, that's fine, because after knight here to E5, then we see the exchange here on G8. The exchange back, now the rook can come over here to E5 because there can't be that in-between move. You can't have that knight here to C4, which you could before, because again, that would give check to his opponents. That king right now is no longer on D2, so we can't do that, and all of a sudden, things are going to go very, very badly for him. Magnus Carlsen is definitely going to be up in this position. Even after the rook comes down here, Magnus Carlsen is going to be doing very, very well. So, that one subtle move of just coming over here to D1 instead of D2 would have made all the difference. But in the game, Magnus Carlsen played king here to D2. Vishy Anand really just had to play knight here to E5. He would have gone on to maybe not an easy one. It was still a pretty tough position, but definitely a commanding lead. He would not have lost any points if he had done that. In the game, though, made a huge blunder, back-to-back blunders. One of the first times they said that there's been such huge blunders back-to-back in such a high level of play. Pawn here to A4, Magnus Carlsen then immediately plays king to E2, recognizing that he needs to get his king off of the square on D2 so that the knight can't come over here to C4 with that check and gain momentum and that tempo on his opponent. We now see pawn here to A3. Again, not doing too much. Pawn to F3, trying to make sure that he has protection on this rook, but also wants to make sure he's defending the square here on G2 because the slide square bishop is adding pressure there. Rook over here to D8, trying to control this long file. King to E1, rook to D7, getting ready to double up if he needs to. Bishop back here to C1. Now the rook's going to swing over here to A8. It's not clear how he's going to add too much pressure over here on the queen side. Bishop over here to A4. Vishy Anand, he even said it at the end. He just started playing poorly because mentally he had just been dominated. That move just completely destroyed his game. Now the bishop's forced to come back here, and then the bishop's going to come up here, take that material off the board. All of a sudden the rook's going to start gobbling up material. Magnus Carlsen starts to gain even more material advantage, and so after just a few moves, we now see Vishy Anand resign in this position. Magnus Carlsen up quite a bit of material and more centralized king, so going to be a pretty easy game to end out here for Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen wasn't even too happy about this win at the end just because he made such a huge blunder, and he even said this could have cost me the championship. That one move, king to D2, could have cost me the entire championship, but he did say he was relieved more than anything. Vishy Anand just looked completely heartbroken. He realized that he passed up maybe the biggest opportunity that he's had in a very long time, especially against Magnus Carlsen, who doesn't make very many mistakes, especially at that point in the match. So all of a sudden, congratulations, Magnus Carlsen. He is now up a point on Vishy Anand. And the next match, or the next game, Vishy Anand will have to play black again, and Magnus Carlsen is going to be coming back with the white pieces. So we have 6 more games left in the series. We've done 6 so far, so 12 total for the World Championship. Magnus Carlsen playing extremely well, minus that blunder. He is still playing extremely good poker. So hopefully he can keep it up. Vishy Anand's going to have to come up with something different, or he's going to be runner-up yet again. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. Hopefully you learned something. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.